exciting news. Tickets for the Conference on Religious Trauma, Court 2023, are now available. Also, if you're interested in an ad-free version of the Divorcing Religion podcast, come join me over on Patreon. Links for both are in the show notes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. And I am so pleased to have today my guest, Jena Miyu, joining me. I know her from Twitter as Black Female Atheist. Jena is the co-owner of a YouTube channel called the Atheist Network Group, The Flavor, with her boyfriend Oz. Jena was raised a Baptist Christian and has been an atheist for nearly 4 years. She's been part of the online atheist community for the same amount of time. Jena has co-hosted, produced, and run several different shows and channels, and I'll be including the links for those in our show notes. Hi, Jena. Thanks for joining me.
No, thank you, Janice, for having me.
It's really nice to get to actually chat with you. I've watched some of the YouTube programs that you've been involved in, and I'm familiar with you on Twitter. So it's a treat to get to connect with you this way.
No, I'm very much looking forward to it. I know you've been so gracious and reached out to me. I would say close to almost a year, maybe just a few months. It seems like a long time, but
I think a lot
has appreciate this. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It seems like a lot has happened in your life in the last year. You've had a lot of changes yourself, so it's no small feat.
Not only just, mentally, but just physically, the physical change of, I'm originally born and raised in California. I've officially moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana for, I guess, going on 4 months now.
Wow.
So beginning of this year, I've moved from West Coast to East Coast. A dramatic difference. I've gotten several people have come up to me through work or, personal outings, be like, oh, why would you do that? And, I have my reasons, mainly with being, in closer proximity, living with my boyfriend, Oz, us being in love and wanting to establish, a solid relationship and everything, even though we had initial plans for him to actually move to California. But, things change and, everything in between just fostered me to just make the transition myself. And honestly, it was a great decision.
He must be pretty special. He's a very lucky fellow.
Oh, I'm sure he knows.
Yes, yeah,
he definitely. Yes,
so that was a huge move, and you also mentioned when we were chatting that you have a background in healthcare. But what I'd really like us to start with is if you could fill us in a little bit on what it was like for you growing up and being a Christian or embracing Christianity, if you did in any significant way, and then leaving. What was all that like?
Yeah. So yes, as you had mentioned in the intro, I was raised as Baptist Christian. So, being Christian and also African American, it's a very interesting relationship where it's all intertwined. The kind of like identity of being a Black person, even more a Black woman, you're married to automatically being religious, more 9 times out of 10 Christian. So, my experience growing up, I would say as young as I can remember up into my late teens is I've always been in the church. I started, singing in the choir when I was about age 5. I was baptized I was anointed by oil when I was 3, baptized at like 6 or 7, and then rebaptized when we changed churches at like 11. Obviously, enough of that didn't work.
I didn't think.
Yeah, we got dipped in water twice and anointed with oil. Apparently wasn't enough. But, my friends, what I grew to know about the world and experience was through church. So I wasn't always like 7 days a week in church, but a lot of my life activity things encompass that. My family home, it didn't have crosses on the wall or biblical scriptures all over the place or anything like that. But the walk and talk of my parents was Christianese in a sense, if that's
Mm-hmm.
understandable. Everything is done because of God's blessing. We pray, and that's why this happens. And we're just always blessed and highly favored. So that was the culture and my upbringing. And I guess I could say for myself, I didn't silently start to question until around my early teens, when I finally stopped falling asleep during church.
Mm-hmm.
And it was times where I was out of the choir and actually had to sit in church with the big adults instead of going to the kids choir,
Mm-hmm.
what is it, sermons where, they fed you chicken nuggets and stuff. So, so once I was, considered a big girl, actually having to sit through church, and once I finally start to actually listen to my pastor preach and maybe kind of glance at scripture, I was like, oh, that sounds funny. But, that kind of just nestled a little bit, and over time it kind of grew. But I never openly questioned to anyone, not to my family, not to church friends, anybody. It always stayed internal for many, many, many years. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like the upbringing.
Yeah, and then you became a nurse. So at some point you were exposed
Mhm.
to science. How did that fit with your any kind of young earth creation, any kind of that stuff? Did that
Yeah.
bring up questions?
To be honest, I never had that preview. Like I always kept consistently hearing that, 2,000 years ago, that's where, life was created or made. But I always thought that in the sense of, that's when, Jesus was born and died and things like that. So actual, you know, sinless life. I don't know how I kind of phrased it in my head, but I always believed in science. It was never me thinking it was like, oh, the earth is, 6,000 years. It was always I loved, National Geographic science channels. I, embellished myself in like the Cosmos series and things like
Yeah.
that. So I believed all that stuff. So
Awesome.
my rationale was combining all of that with, God did it. So that was the easy explanation for me,
Hmm.
especially with evolution, biology, all that stuff, because those were like my favorite subjects. Biology, not so much chemistry, but more the lines of studying the stars and space and how vast it
Yeah.
is. And you know, I, I can't recall if I ever had a moment to where thinking like, oh, we're just the only ones here. I might have maybe for like a small moment thinking like, oh, this is why God created just the earth because we're that special,
Mhm.
aliens and things. That's just, movie science fiction stuff. Like
Mhm.
that was easy for me to kind of pick apart. But that's kind of how I attached to that. And as far as leading into nursing, well, I have a background of family, all nurses. My sister, she's 3 years older than I am. She's a nurse. My mother's a nurse as well. I have a stepsister that's a nurse.
Wow.
So that kind of just fell on me. And I love
Wow.
it. Yeah, I love being a
Yeah.
nurse.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. And I'm curious about so being raised in a Christian family where you are taught that, you're blessed and highly favored. What what would happen or how did it get explained when bad things happened?
Yeah, it was kind of just that easy explain away where, if you pray about it, God did it or it happened for a reason, or God did it out of necessity. And one very pivotal point for me that caused me to really start my deconstruction phase was when my biological father passed away. I was 20 years old. It was
Mm.
about the first few weeks of me starting my third year of undergrad. And my mother contacts me. It was like a Thursday night, just me coming out of a class, actually. Contacts me, says my father's in the hospital and he wants you to come home and see him and everything. So I was like, well, I kept asking what's wrong. I kept asking, like, is it okay? So literally so I was still in the state of California where I went to school. I was just in Northern California. So it literally takes a 3-hour train ride and then a 3-hour bus ride to get back to Southern California where I lived. So very next day I'm on a train bus home. My mother and my sister picked me up because my sister happened to already be home. out of school and into like nursing school herself. So she was going through nursing school at the time. And so they pick me up and take me home. But I'm thinking, well, I just want to go straight to a hospital. So I want to see my dad. But it turns out that he had already passed. So it was an instance, and nothing that I hate my mom for doing. I think she smartly, coached me home, because the night that she called, he was already, passed away. He was already dead. What had happened is, I guess he was, it happened on the job. He suffered like a blood clot that just traveled to one of his major veins and just laid out on the floor in the office. And on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, he had already was gone. Wow. So, that devastation. And then within a week, planning that funeral, going to the funeral, I remember either a family member, I can't point out the face, but I just remember this individual coming to me after the services. Everyone's kind of consoling the family, things like that. And I was already tearful, of course. And she approached me and was like, God needs your father for a reason. And I just saw red. So those simple explanations of like covering the bad just to say, oh, God needs your dad for, well, I'm still a young woman. I need my dad.
Exactly.
What could God really do? What's the purpose of this God taking away my father in this even more critical time in my life? Because he saw there was so much I wanted my dad to see that he witnessed for my sister, because my sister had just graduated college. I want him to witness me graduating college, all that stuff.
Yes,
and, other things in between. So it was those kind of Christianese language things that just irk me to my core, especially that one. And that kind of propelled my deconstruction phase that I would say lasted several years. Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry you lost your dad, especially so young. That's a really tremendous loss at that time in life, because you're in such a state of transition and growth as you're moving from young adulthood into adulthood. And we can really benefit from having supportive parents around at that time. I think you mentioned a step sibling. So it seems that maybe you have additional family, or your mom is married to someone else at this point.
Oh, well, yes and no. So the step sibling is actually older. I have actually, step sibling. I'm sorry. I always confuse it. It's actually a half sibling.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So I have 3 half siblings, 2 half brothers and a half sister. They're older. They're actually from my father's first marriage.
Oh, I see.
So there is, unfortunately, between my biological sister and myself, there's no relationship there, unfortunately. Not that we never wanted it, but a lot kind of crept up after my father's death. Somehow seemingly that kind of tends to happen when, someone unexpectedly passes, like, oh, such and such fight or whatever. But when my father divorced his first wife, he, in the sense, divorced his kids too. So, having me and my sister, I guess that was him reestablishing being better towards his other set of kids. So unfortunately, we don't have a relationship there. But my mother did, after a few years, did remarry. It was about maybe 5 years ago. She remarried. And unfortunately, we lost him just April of last year.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
yeah,
so much loss in one family.
Yeah.
Painful.
And I have known him many years when we transitioned to a new church, like I was young as maybe like my early teens. And the beautiful, I guess you could say, about their relationship is he was, once married to, his wife had passed from, I think, a brain tumor, brain cancer, something like that. And within a month, I don't know if his wife passed first, but within a month, my father had passed. So they kind of shared in kind of that grief of losing their spouses at around the same time. And it was beautiful. The whole courtship was, as my mother would say, God sent, because at my church, at my family's church, there would be a moment of prayer where a group of the church people will go up to the altar and hold hands and have a conjoined prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it was, a blessing or godsend or however they phrased it, where they had joined hands, or I guess he felt a sense of this was, bound to be made to be, because she took his hand and, after service was over, he had asked her out.
Wow.
That started their courtship, I guess.
Wow.
I thought that,
Wow.
it's adorable, but hey, I can't say anything against that. So they were married for 4 years, and unfortunately he passed. We witnessed him, dying in front of us, because that was, and something about that is a little bit different. And I don't know whether this is a good or bad thing to say, but I'm so glad I didn't witness my dad passing in front of me. I'm a daddy's girl. So that would have took my life in a whole other direction, I think, even already as it is. But, I had a lot of love for my stepdad too, but having witnessed his passing as an atheist and having gone through the death of my dad when I was a believer, kind of analyzing both of those situations so many years apart was dramatically different for me, especially during the grieving process and getting everything, funeral arrangements and everything with my stepdad in the presence of my mom and my sister, because I could identify that it was difficult for me to grieve with them, because they always prayed. They always asked for healing and strength through God's grace and things. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know where to get my, I'm just going to grieve somehow. And all I could do was, at this point, me and Oz weren't living together yet. This was sometime early last year. I would say around a year ago this time, that, I would just call and text and talk to him, because I just didn't know who to talk to. So that was very interesting ordeal to go through. A lot to go through.
It's very, like what you said, the difference between losing a parent when you were a believer and then losing one when you were no longer a believer. It's very different. And I do find that grief can become complicated for people who are staunch believers, because of course they think we don't grieve as the world grieves, we don't mourn as the world mourns, because our great hope lies beyond. So they don't really settle into the full sense of loss, because they're holding on to that hope of, but we're going to be together again. And sometimes they don't even feel like they could cry or express grief, because it was God's choice. Like that lady said, God needed him. God took him home. And that can really thwart the grieving process and make things additionally hard.
Absolutely. And I could see that more clearly this time around when my stepdad passed, because aside from just not knowing how to comfort them, how they are used to being comforted, like it would be interesting it was almost like, and I hate to say this, it was almost like I was researching, kind of studying how they were and thinking back how I was and thinking how I am now in the midst of it all. And it was very frustrating, because I was pained with, wanting to be there for my family, and how much of a loss, it was, especially for my mom now having to lose a second husband. But, I didn't necessarily call him my dad or anything like that. I called him his name was, we called him Mr. Larry, me and my sister. So I don't know. It was interesting to see the aftermath, especially after the funeral, where my mom just propelled herself to just overwork. That's how I know my mom always deals with stress. And, she's a young, vivacious woman. Like, you see her, she does not look her age. She'll be 66 in a week. We're taking a trip to DC next week because she wants to. She's never been. None of us have been to DC before, and she wants to go to the Smithsonian African American Museum and do all this fun stuff. So I haven't seen them since I left, so that'd be nice. But she's very young. She works full time, but she works double overtime because that's just how she deals with stress. She does a lot of home projects. So, I paid a lot of money to get this done. And then, okay, once that's done, she doesn't take a break. She goes on to the next project. So seeing how my mom dealt with her grief, and I'm sure she's still doing it that way. That's been that process. And then for my sister, she was just newly married over a year ago. And unfortunately, there's been like a more or less a little bit of a breakdown in that marriage in the beginning. So her trying to establish, she's she's 3 years older than me. I'm 33. So she wants, to start a family. And of course, with women getting older, that tends to be a little bit more difficult. And especially if, the husband's not really around because he's a truck driver. And just seeing how she also did more work, but then propelled herself into, being a shopaholic, even though she tends to shop more, but it increased. So I saw those differences in them. And then I had to look at myself because, what caused me, what happened to me. And I think after my stepdad's funeral, that's kind of initiated a lot of me coming out to them. Cause at that point I was closeted, and at that point they had no idea about Oz, me being in, at that point, a long distance relationship with him. And especially the fact that he's also an atheist too, that would have been huge. And the unfortunate addition to that, the fact that he is not Black. Obviously he is a white man. So that is another kind of ugly, unfortunate layer. So all of that just made me want to just feel like I can no longer feel like I'm covering up me anymore. And on mid-August of last year, that's when I pretty much told them everything, all except me being a content creator. That's the only thing I've kept for now, a safe haven. I'll, if they attempt to discover or happen to find video of me, then I'll let that be that. But I'm never openly doing that with them. But, I told them I was an atheist. I no longer believed, and I no longer believed for quite a while at that point. And, I think I am planning to move.
Wow. So how did that conversation go? Had you been planning it, or did it just kind of all tumble out in the middle of a conversation?
That is an interesting question, because how do you plan a conversation like that? And I told Oz when we first initially dated that, I think this is going to be my secret forever, because I have no idea how I'm going to tell my family, let alone just having lost my biological dad. And then many months later, losing my stepfather. And as far as I know, all of my family being staunch, heavy Baptist Christian people, Bible thumping, believing people. This would mortify them. This would mortify me. And I just want to not do this. I don't want to be a devastation. That's how I felt. I don't want to be another thing that devastates them or feel like I, messed up the family, all this stuff. I would forever blame myself for hurting them. And that's how I felt we had a conversation a week or two prior to me actually coming out to them. And all that day, we went out to brunch at a new place where my mother and my sister wanted to try. Come to find out, they no longer want to go there because I tainted it. Because I used that as my coming out, location. Like, yeah, we're going to sit here, have brunch. And, okay, well, I have something to say. So, I went back. It's good food. But anyway, that it was apart from other days that I can recall leading up to the time that I finally left, that was the most ugliest I ever seen my mother and my sister towards me. and the most heartbreaking, devastating I ever felt. And maybe it was bad on me to make it in a public arena, but, I was obviously publicly shamed. After sitting there for maybe close to 2 hours of my sister and my mom bickering at me back and forth, it didn't become ugly until I said I wanted to move. Like, they first really questioned why I lost my faith. What harmed you? Why are you angry at God? The classical questions. And, I answered them as best as I could with all the knowledge I kind of retrieved from being on shows and advice people would give me. I'm like, okay, I got to remember this. None of that helped. But it's good that, you have people to talk to about those things, but, you're never prepared for that stuff. But it didn't become truly ugly until I mentioned my relationship with Oz and mentioning that I wanted to move. And I said in about, 6 to 7 months. And, at the time I owned a home, I co-shared a mortgage, a home with my sister. It was our family home that me and my sister bought from my mother about a few months before she remarried. So we had, up until that point, owned it together for about 4.5 years. So, and at that point, she was already married too. So we had 3 people sharing in the cost of the home. To her, on her side, and I don't know how I truly feel about it just yet, but she obviously was devastated at the fact that she would lose someone. Like, I guess I happened to, forget that I made a promise a year before that I would give her 2 years advance notice before I would leave. And, not knowing that, at that time, a year ago, I was single and not knowing what life would bring. Like, hello, we just went through COVID. That suddenly changed a lot for people. So, I figured, 6, 7 months notice was decent. But, she was really angry, very, very angry with me and with my mother. Just the fact that I'm just wanting to break up the family, move, leave. Why would you? Why do you not want to be with your mother? All sorts of stuff, and more, shaming when we left the restaurant out in the parking lot, her yelling at me, screaming at me, saying, I'm not ashamed of God. How dare you be ashamed of God? It was nasty.
Wow. And
yeah.
But something's gone on in the meantime, because you're looking at attending the birthday get together.
So yes, I will say, after another huge talk over the phone, maybe 2 months ago, things seem to be, they're okay. Cause, well, I only say that because I don't truly know. Because my family is good at not really talking about things.
Most families are.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one's no different. And sharing, heartfelt feelings or issues or things that just we want to talk about that doesn't even have to deal directly with us is difficult. So a lot of that, for most, if not all my life, I internalized. And even when moments when I never had the best of relationship with my mom, but I love my mother and we got along. My mom and my sister are like twins. So, they're set together, and I gravitated to my dad. So when I lost that, I kind of lost, my safety, my comfort, just, I have to just learn to be more like you guys, because this is all I got. And that was that way for several years. So, it did change only because they finally got to hear from me after not hearing from me for maybe like a week and a half. And the frustrating part of all of that messed with me mentally for a while, and still and occasionally does, is they expected for me, I was always have to be the initiator. They expected me to always contact them when I got nothing from them. and then once my mom finally did call, she went into the story about the dog. And then it went into her saying, well, don't you want to hear your mother's voice? Don't you want to know that I'm okay? And in my mind, I'm like,
Wow.
don't you want to know about your daughter too? Like, why are you pinning this on me? And then
Mm-hmm.
going into
Mm-hmm.
the language of, you abandoned us. You did this to us. And then I
Wow.
can hear my sister in the background yelling at me, saying the same words. And I'm like, why are we doing this?
Pack your bags. You're going on a guilt trip. That's
Yeah,
what that was.
exactly. And after that conversation, I guess they felt better because they just wanted to get out that last bit of frustration. And they didn't think I was going to still do the whole DC trip. And I was like, I'm still doing that. I love you as my mom. I want to celebrate that. Plus, I want to go to DC too. So it's it's hard even now, because I kind of keep myself busy enough not to really think about it or distract my mind not to think about it, that none of it's been resolved. It's this surface level. We're okay. We can be cordial. We don't have to bring it up so much, even though I kind of feel like it'll be brought up when I'm with them.
And is Oz attending as well?
He is not. It's just me, my sister, and my mother.
Yes, that will be a little bit easier probably for your first time getting together since this whole thing happened. One thing that came to mind as you were chatting, I don't know if you're familiar with author Candace Gorham. She wrote The Ebony Exodus. Well, Candace has been, yes, and she's been a guest on my conference, the Conference on Religious Trauma. I've had her on a couple of times, and she also wrote a book strictly related to grieving, like what happens when atheists lose someone. So I can't remember the name of that book. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes, but it strikes me that might be a really helpful book as well.
Definitely. Yes. Because, I think I also noticed with my grieving and losing, because it's so funny. Well, I say that only because I don't know any phrase, but when I came out of my deconstruction and realized that I fully did not believe I'm an atheist, I understand as much as I can, and this just does not make sense. I had to then re-grieve my biological dad's death because, being taught there is an afterlife, there's heaven, that's where he is, that's where I'm going to see him again. Clearly I'm not. So I had to cry all my tears out again and re-grieve that loss again after several years after his death, knowing that that was it. And then, following after that with the grief of my stepdad, I think in the final moments, just seeing him in that ICU bed, kind of the only thing that's keeping him alive is this machine, and just kind of in my head, silently talking to him, even though I know he can't really hear my words or anything, and, rubbing his hand and being there. I had my moment of knowing that I did my best to help and take care of him, and, spent the time and enjoyed the time with him and how well he's treated my mom. So in that moment, I allowed my grief there, and that was it. But of course, with my mom, my sister, with faith, they hang on to more. And I also suffered a grief with moving because, it wasn't an easy decision, even though in their eyes, it seemed that way. But it wasn't easy on several fronts. One, it's not easy for me to stay in a place where I don't feel comfortable being myself, and that I have to be apart from this person that I feel genuinely loves and cares about me. I want that relationship, and I'm willing to risk seeing how this goes. So far, it's gone really well. We're very happy together. But also grieving at the fact that, it had to come to this and how ugly it became leading up to it. Like I said, that day coming out in August was one of the ugliest, but it wasn't just that solid day. There are like very other moments where it was just my mother calling me names, ugly names, scaring me, thinking I would be, something would happen to me tragically if I left, thinking I can't do this on my own. You've always had the shelter of me take care of you, which is nonsense because I've owned my own home, worked my own job, all of that, put myself through. It's all of that to instill a fear of you should not do this and you're hurting us. So grieving at that ugliness I felt from my family that I never imagined I would get and that I would have to leave them too. But this is what adults do. And then, just realizing this in my early 30s, like this is what normal, adult kids do in their early 20s. And I've yet to allow myself to experience that. And I'm sure there's a number of reasons why that inhibited a lot of my own progress. But it made me feel so terrible. And occasionally, sometimes it still does, where I know it's not purely my fault. And I know I'm not a perfect person and I didn't always do the right things, but why is this so hard? And why are you making it so hard? Dealing with those things has been not easy.
No, it doesn't sound easy. You've had so much, you've just had so much going on emotionally, so many things happening. And you mentioned the move also as a loss, even though it's a tremendous gain because you get to be with a partner who loves you and you love him and starting your life off, in this new place. But it's true that with every gain comes a loss because it means there's a transition of some sort. And even exciting, wonderful, anticipated transitions, they still can involve a sense of loss as we're having to let go of what we knew, of the familiar, and move forward into the unfamiliar. And it also, I think one of my biggest losses around losing my faith and becoming an atheist was I was so used to praying. God was always right there, like just right there. Whatever was going on, I could just pour it out to Jesus, just leave it at the altar, all this kind of stuff. He was my cosmic big brother. So I had this, unrealistic sense of safety and protection and all these things. And so to lose my identity and my ideology and my worldview was just so shocking and felt so lonely. And I'm really glad that you now have Oz. And before Oz, you did manage to find connection with an atheist or the atheist community.
I did. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that because, and you saying that hit me, refining an identity, that's something but maybe a year and a half ago that I finally understood what that meant or understood what my identity was or understood who I was as a person or what I liked. Because having that separation from faith in the self, so hard, because then you wonder, well, what's more good? What's more bad? I'm okay to make these decisions. Who am I? What do I enjoy? Can I still be a good person without this? And you can, obviously you can. But, even more potent for me is, this attachment, this sick attachment of being a Black woman and having a Christian background or being a Christian is just so, deprecating. I think it's just the worst, application to a Black woman that you can put because you're expected to be this or demonstrate this or be this way. And, one of the things I like to think about and say is that, this whole strong woman archetype thing is just this terrible poison that is just attached to a Black woman. And it's like you give them this hierarchy, this false hierarchy of thinking that they're so powerful, but they're not. And, and you become powerful in your own right. And so just having that separation of, I'm expected to act and appear this way on top of, the culture and how I was raised with my family, with my parents, especially with my mom, I always had to demonstrate myself as what she saw I should be, not what I wanted to be. So, having the different colored eyes and hair would just blow her mind. She would, have a heart attack. So she does not see me this way. And when I see her in DC, she won't see me this way. But it helped me, it propelled me to see how I see myself. My favorite color is purple. I always dared myself to dye my hair purple. And so now I got a little blonde in it. And, I feel comfortable. I feel like myself. And I genuinely, being here, I feel like my genuine self too, because I feel like I've been given this allowance to go out at night and not having to tell anyone where I am, or having that freedom to not feel like I have to go to church or wake up for early morning something when I don't want to, or just feeling like I don't have to always agree with, the demands of what my mom expects from me or what my sister even expects from me. I am my natural self being here, and I'm comfortable and I'm happy with that. And it feels liberating.
Yeah.
And finding that now and getting that separation from, Christianity I feel I'm my best version of myself fully than I have ever been. And realizing that, I'm still a good person.
Yes, exactly. I love it. All those things that you're saying, those are powerful things to recognize. And sometimes it does take a literal move, a geographic, locational move, to help us firmly separate and come out from under, especially if we have had Christian parents and it's really expected that we remain part of that community. And I think that's even more problematic when you're Black and part of the Black community and the Black church and all that stuff forced on you as well. And you've been able to move to a place where you can absolutely start over again and present yourself as you want to be presented. And you're really, the real you is coming out and shining. And that's just so powerful.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And it's been good. And the irony of moving here is, I guess, Fort Wayne is known as the city of churches.
Oh, no.
There's literally, it's worse than Starbucks. Like how Starbucks is every corner. Every second building is a church. It's so funny. But
is there an atheist community in the city?
There is. We do have a friend that has a meetup every Sunday that I've yet to go to, but I need to, called the Humanist Fellowship Assembly. It's his own meetup of small community of atheists that gather every Sunday around noon at a local park. And I'm sure there are other groups too, but what we really found and what was great for the community here in the city of Fort Wayne is that Oz and I host a convention known as Better. And we had our first one last year, and we'll have another one at the beginning of August of this year here in Fort Wayne. And so, the local atheist individuals that didn't have a place to go, nor like a convention that would be close by. We saw a lot of local gathering of those, and then feeling like, wow, we have this. Are you going to have it next year? This is amazing. Like, I've never been in a room full of this many atheist people. Neither have I. That was my first experience being in a room full of atheist people or friends that I've met online and things. So we're definitely doing it again this year in August. And, having that gathering for them was great to experience through their eyes. And it made me tearful at times. And having so many people come up to me and tell me their experience, I'm like, oh my gosh, you sound like me. So that's been overwhelming. And yes, prior to being with Oz, meeting so many beautiful people that lent me advice or talk to me at lengths at night, or I talk to them at lengths at night, or whether they've been public or private conversations, they've been absolutely helpful. And they help me realize that I can have the strength to be myself As weird as that may sound, you do have the strength to be yourself, but allow yourself to do it on your own terms. Because there were
Exactly.
people that pushed me to say, just go ahead and do it. I came out, no big deal. Sure, some people, I have had friends that had beautiful experiences,
Hmm.
of their family being so open and okay, even discovering that some family were similar to them. They were afraid to say it, but not everyone's that way. And you have to be sensitive to that. And that's
Hmm.
always been my message. Allow a person to do it on their own terms. And I knew a
Hmm.
friend that wasn't able to. And that was even more devastating for him. But I was given the chance to do it on my own terms. Granted, it was still ugly, but I did it.
Hmm.
And that makes me feel good.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And taking back our autonomy when we have spent
Mhm.
decades living as
Exactly.
Christians is extremely important. And part of that is being able to choose where and when and how we are going to
Exactly.
disclose and how much we want to disclose, because we want
Exactly.
to make sure that we're disclosing to safe people as much as we can help it, and we want to make sure if we need to have finances put aside to
Mhm.
help us, or we need to have the support of someone else waiting in the wings. We want to make sure all that's put in place, and then we even want to look at why we feel compelled. What is it that, and what's the message that is it a big fu, or is it just because we want to be known authentically for who we are? It's good to
Mhm.
think through these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely is. And I gave my time to think it through. Again, there's nowhere to prepare it, but at least you had the control, the autonomy, like you said, to do it. So
Hmm.
afford yourself that.
Yeah. And one other thing you mentioned too was about uh, reclaiming identity. When we were part of the church, we were essentially told who and how to be, what was expected of us, what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable. So you can't like crop tops because that's not holy. You have to only like being totally covered up or whatever it
Right.
is. And when we realize we don't hold the same religious beliefs anymore, we don't even know sometimes what we actually like and what we want. And so that's
Yeah.
where values clarification work can come in and be very helpful. That's something I do with my clients who are recovering from religious trauma syndrome. And we go through sheets of values and put a mark beside which one is important to you, and then sometimes we're comparing and contrasting it with our religious
Yeah.
values that can show us how we've grown and changed, and we can even do it every few years as we continue to mature, and that's a really helpful way for
Mhm.
people to be moving ahead, and forging their secular identity. And one thing we need to watch
Absolutely.
out for is we don't want to cult hop. We don't want to go from one, because we've been primed for it. We've been primed for
Yep.
authoritarian thinking and magical thinking. And then it's super easy then to
Mhm.
get sucked into a yoga cult or whatever kind of other,
Yeah.
cults are out there, because they are everywhere and because humans are vulnerable to such things. So it's important to be aware, that's for sure.
Yes, it is. On top of which, yes, because I've known individuals that have leapt to something else to replace that missing something.
Mhm.
And, that's the whole purpose of having, especially with, with the recent years of COVID that made a lot of things virtual or made a lot of people just have to stay at home and things like that. You miss out on interacting with people physically, but that's why I drew and grew so much importance around having online communities, growing the channel that Oz and I have together, because having someone maybe you can't physically touch or physically see in front of you, but you can feel their energy, you can feel the compassion, and hearing them speak and having someone to converse with, the benefit of having these online communities, these places where you can socialize, it's pretty much the same as, socializing, going to a church meeting or, how they have their Sunday services, because the huge aspect of losing your faith is you no longer are part of that gathering and you're
Mm-hmm.
ostracized or you're pushed
Mm-hmm.
out or you don't feel comfortable being there anymore. Now you're just left with, especially if that's all you have, all your friends and family are there. It's like, well, what now? I don't have anyone else to have support or communicate with or convene with or, console with. And that's the beautiful benefit of me, even though recently I haven't been as much, but being integrated in the online space, having a channel and being able to speak with friends that are miles away from me, but I can see them, is needed.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Better convention that you were talking about? What sorts of things go
Yes.
on there?
Absolutely. So, with our first Better conference last year, it was in June, late June. It was basically just convening a group of people that are like-minded and, understanding that this is who we are and we're not afraid of, saying that we are atheists, but we are people too. And that kind of tagged onto with our Better conference for this year, where we not only identify as this is who we are, but who we are as atheists, what we like to do as, good law abiding citizens or nurses or whatever kind of backgrounds that you may have. And we've had several speakers last year, which included Dave Warnock, Seth Andrews,
Awesome.
and Dave is coming back to us this year as our
Oh,
keynote speaker. We had
wonderful.
Drew, the genetically modified skeptic, was on one of our panel speakers. So he's going to be one of our main speakers this year as well. A great friend of Oz that he grew up listening to, that was once a part of a Christian rap group. I don't know if you know Fanatic or Brady Goodwin.
No,
So
but
he's going
that
to be,
sounds very
yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, and he, in the last year and a half, came out as atheist, which blew Oz's mind.
Wow.
So now they're
Wow.
friends because he grew up listening to that Christian rap group, and come to
Wow.
find out one of his, quote unquote heroes is now an atheist too. So we have him as a speaker. He's a great individual. He has his own channel as well. Great, great person. And numerous others that are just close friends of ours that are going to be a part of our panels and just be a part of the experience. Dr. Josh Bowen will be there as well. He was a speaker for us last year. So a lot of it is just, convening with friends, yes, for that 2-day weekend, but also just having that experience of sharing and getting to know each other more. And even with the local community, oh man, how much they benefited from it last year. I'm sure they're hopefully looking forward to it
Wow.
again. And I know I am. I'm excited.
And
So.
it was in Fort Wayne.
It was in Fort Wayne. Yes.
So, I mean, that had to be a shock in such a Christianized city.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We ran into some interesting, I listened to my boyfriend said, when I say interesting things, we ran into some troubles, especially with, I won't give names or the organization, but I will say it was a hotel where we tried to, book our speakers and everything. And, Oz going back and forth dealing with the manager, and especially with the manager of the place we booked the conference at, them knowing that we were non-believers, they gave us a bit of a hard time, to say the least. So that was the
Wow.
most, yeah.
Were they like, no baby eating? There'll be no baby eating.
I wish that would have at least been funny.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, we run into all sorts of resistance when we come out as atheists. And then when we are trying to do any sort of group interactions, for sure. I'm so glad that you guys are doing it, though, because the world needs to know, and Christians need to know, that atheists are real people. They're good people. We certainly abide by ethics, and a lot of us follow very humanist principles to guide us in the things that we do. And the world is a better place with atheists in it. So that's just fantastic. I think I'm about ready to end our visit on that note, because it's so happy. I would like you to tell folks how they might find you or get in touch with you if anyone wants to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate this time. I will say it's been a while since I've done any interview, I've done a live or even recorded anything. So I feel a little rusty, but if you feel led, follow
That's
me,
right.
right? If you, I'm more than times on Twitter at twitter.com/ at Jena_BFA. So yes, I am known as Black Female Atheist. I do have my own personal YouTube channel under that same moniker. Don't really have content there. Mainly it is with the Atheist Network Group. YouTube channel that I share with my partner Oz that we are recently rebranding as The Flavor. So that's the extra tag there.
Oh,
Yeah, the purpose of that is, we're wanting to have more conversation, just not just about, the Christian real faith and are not about it, but, what other atheists identify with. So more along the lines of relationships and sexuality, social issues, culture, things like that.
hmm.
I know a big thing for me and Oz right now is having more discussions that we don't see about open relationships.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we're taking more of a dive there. And
Hmm.
so you can find us, it's right now labeled the Atheist Network Group. You can easily search that in YouTube and just Twitter. And of course, if you're interested coming here to Fort Wayne, Indiana for the Better Conference, August 5th and 6th this year, we're just now opening up our Eventbrite. So we'll have links to that on our YouTube channel as well as on my Twitter in the coming week. So there you go.
Very cool. And because you mentioned relationships and exploring different types of relationships, I will remind our viewers and listeners that last year I hosted the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture online conference. And because it was such a spectacular event with some really profound discussions that took place there, including a panel on all sorts of different types of relationships, I want so many people to avail themselves of those videos that I'm offering all of them now for just $50 for every session, the whole thing from all of the Shameless Sexuality Conference. There's a discount code, so you'll see that in the show notes. And even if folks really want to feel they'd be helped by the videos and they can't afford it, then I want to hear from you because I want to help you have access to those videos. And I'll just remind folks as well, they can go to my website, divorcing-religion.com. I am a registered professional counselor, and I do work with clients one-on-one recovering from religious trauma syndrome. Jena Miyu, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. I hope that our paths will cross again.
I do too. Thank you so much, Janice, for this time. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. Okay, take care of yourself. Bye-bye, everyone.